On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, we review the 1943 Warner Brothers picture Action in the North Atlantic. Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but it is Memorial Day 2023, and I thought there was no better time to go ahead and do this. And the movie we're going to review is Action in the North Atlantic. This is the definitive merchant marine movie for the United States in World War II. I love this movie, not going to lie, one of my favorites of all time. It's cheesy at points, the special effects are not always the best, but there's no other movie. You have tons of Army and Air Force and Marines and you name it in World War II, but the only real merchant marine for the U.S. video is this one. And so we're going to go ahead and use the trailer. We're going to talk about this video, and then we're going to talk about some resources you can go to if you want to learn more about the U.S. Merchant Marine in World War II. Before we do that, if you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, Action in the North Atlantic. Better call Sal.
Submarine, 2 points abaft the port beam.
Signal attack formation. Aye, aye, sir.
The music in this movie is great. I'll give him that. So, Action in the North Atlantic follows a crew, not particularly a ship, because you actually go on two different ships here. You're actually on a tanker that begins this, the Northern Star, and then you're later on a Liberty ship, the Sea Witch. But the focus is on a crew, and I think that's really important because they look at the people, not so much the ships. And the merchant mariners in World War II hold a very unique position. They're civilians. They're not in the Navy. They are the few civilians, at least for the United States, that are in the direct line of fire. 9,500 of them are killed in World War II. 733 merchant ships, U.S. merchant ships, are sunk. And they hold a very distinct place. They are the key in delivering the goods from the home front to the battlefront. It doesn't do any good to have the arsenal of democracy in the United States if you can't get the weapons and the material and the supplies into the hands of the combatants, the Allies, the United States, and everybody else in the United Nations. And this movie really pushes that quite a bit, actually. You see that it's not just the U.S. Merchant Marine, but it is the Merchant Marine of multiple nations. There's a scene when they sail into Halifax, and they see ships from around the world that are heading on a convoy up to Russia. And this movie actually got a little bit of a tinge, too, with it because of the fact that the convoy that they're depicting here goes to Russia. There was allegations that this was a pro-Soviet communist movie, so it was kind of blackballed for a number of years. But it is a really good depiction. The special effects are what you expect in a World War II movie. Understand, in World War II, you couldn't film on the high seas. You were restricted, so they had to film basically using models for ships. So you get that weird kind of model image, but it's consistent throughout the movie. But there are other scenes which are just harrowing. There's a scene on board the Northern Star, the tanker, where it gets hit by torpedoes. And I mean, everything's on fire. I mean, things are exploding everywhere. People are jumping in the water. I don't know how there's not a death toll on this movie based on the special effects. It was insane. All right, let's go ahead and continue with the trailer here.
My name is Joe Rossi. I'm first mate on this tanker. We're steaming north to join the eastbound convoy.
So that image right there, and the opening scene is on this tanker, the Northern Star. And let me be clear, when I watched this as a kid, and I wanted to be Joe Rossi, chief mate was the goal for me, because he seemed to be the best character. He's not the captain; that is reserved for Raymond Massey, but Humphrey Bogart is the chief mate. But what's interesting is they're showing a tanker at the beginning of this movie sailing alone in the North Atlantic, which is a true depiction. The Merchant Marine was basically on their own. It's not until April of 1942 that the U.S. nationalizes the Merchant Marine. And it's not until May of 1942 that convoys are instituted along the east coast of the United States. And this meant that starting in December of 41, when the Germans declare war in the United States, December 11th, they will send a flotilla of U-boats, 5 of them, in what's known as Operation Pankenschloss, the drumbeat, to the east coast of the United States, and follow it up with waves of U-boats that eventually will sink over 600 ships up and down the east coast of the United States, down into the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. It is a slaughter. And there's very little done about this. And there's a lot of reasons for it that it's not done. Some people want to blame Admiral Ernest J. King, the chief of naval operations. But in truth, the commander of the Eastern Sea Frontier, Admiral Adolphus Andrews, really did not do what he was supposed to do. The U.S. had basically denuded the East Coast of defenses. What ships were available were being allocated to protect Lend-Lease convoys going transatlantic and to protect troop convoys. And that meant that U.S. merchant ships were really at the mercy of German U-boats off the east coast of the United States. And so you get that with the sinking of the Northern Star, this tanker in the very beginning part of the movie. And you get what's left of the crew actually surviving 11 days at sea on a raft. And you do have members of the crew who die. You see that with Chips the carpenter. Every ship had a carpenter because you had to block and brace cargo and stowage, so you always had someone who was a ship's carpenter on board.
Through the perilous Atlantic steams a grim gray armada, on whose battle-scarred decks ride the precious cargoes for victory that must get through. And dedicating their lives to getting them through are the valiant men of our merchant marine.
So that image of cargo up on the decks is a good one, because one of the things we see throughout World War II is ships carry much more than what they were designed to do. So, for example, most aircraft, especially single-engine fighters and twin-engine bombers, did not fly across the Pacific or the Atlantic. They actually rode on the deck of tankers, for example. You put a spar deck on it and you would load that on board. You would overload these vessels, sometimes with cargo on board, because of the need to get that material across. And you get that depiction here in the movie when they talk about loading down the Sea Witch, the Liberty ship. In this, they joke about the fact that they're going to have to put wheels on the bottom of it because it's riding so low. And lots of times you see that in this movie too. There's a Dutch ship that's depicted where Raymond Massey, the captain, knows the captain of the Dutch ship. And that Dutch ship is loaded with ammunition. It's going to get hit by a U-boat and the vessel completely explodes with no survivors. That happened quite a bit during World War II. This next scene is always an interesting one because the Sea Witch has a naval armed guard detachment on board. It has a naval detachment led by an ensign who is the most good-looking ensign ever in the history of the United States Navy. I always find it interesting that they will depict the Navy as this kind of rugged, handsome guys, whereas the Merchant Marine crew are pretty nasty. They're pretty much, the runts of the litter. But that is true. And matter of fact, there was a lot of confrontation, which I think is overplayed in a lot of histories about this. Basically, these men you see here you see Navy petty officers and ABs, able-bodied seamen on board the ship. They were paid very similar money. Yet there were allegations that the Merchant Marine crews were evading service, that they were not getting paid. They were getting paid more. But in truth, when those guys spend 11 days on a raft, they do that on their own time. They're only paid when they're on the ship. When the ship sinks, they're on their own time. Lots of times you had to be responsible for getting yourself back home. And when these crew members would return back home, lots of times draft boards were waiting for them because they were in violation of the draft. Because they hadn't been sailing, even though they'd been adrift at sea, they were in violation. So one of the great depictions here is this kind of little bit of tension between the Naval Armed Guard detachment and the Merchant Marine crew on board.
What was the last ship you were on?
The Lex.
He means the Lexington.
Here are hardened veterans who have had ships blown out from under them. Eager cadets on their first voyage.
So eager cadets on their first voyage. So one of the things that's created during this period is the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. Now, there's actually 3 corps of cadets at the time: Kings Point, California, and Mississippi, believe it or not. And there were training facilities for merchant mariners throughout these areas. But Kings Point becomes the main center for training cadets. Cadets are going to be those who are getting sea time and becoming officers in the Merchant Marine, either deck officers, third mates, or third assistant engineers. And ironically, the U.S. Merchant Marine is the only service academy. Remember, there's only 2 other ones, or excuse me, there were 3 other ones. You had the Coast Guard Academy, you had the Navy Academy, and you had the U.S. Military Academy. But the Merchant Marine Academy sent their cadets out to sea. And so 142 of them are actually killed during World War II. They're the only service academy that's entitled to fly a battle streamer. And one of the cadets in this movie is really based on a cadet during World War II, Edwin O'Hara, who dies on board the SS Stephen Hopkins, a Liberty ship that runs afoul of a German surface raider. And O'Hara remains at his gun post, firing at the German raider, the Steer, until he himself is killed. And in this movie, the cadet, not to give too much of a huge spoiler here, will find himself in a very similar position.
Heroic gun crews at battle stations, sailing into the terror-infested Atlantic to the battle cry of their commander-in-chief, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead."
So the U-boats in this movie, okay, so you want to have a qualm with it. Number one, the German U-boat commanders are like immaculately dressed. If you've ever watched Das Boot, you know what it's like to be on a German U-boat in World War II. They're not running around with ties and jackets and scarves and everything. And plus the CO of the German U-boat that's depicted in here is a lot older than they normally would be. So they don't quite get that correct. However, the U-boat tactics are true. The Germans were using these mass tactics to break up the convoys. Now, the convoy that's depicted in here, once the crew is saved off the Sea Witch, they go on board, off the Northern Star, and they go on the Sea Witch. This movie is kind of loosely based on the experience of convoy PQ-17. This is the 17th convoy sent from the Allies to Murmansk in northern Russia. And that convoy in July of 1942 is absolutely decimated. It is just decimated. I'll have a great video link here on the convoy if you want to see it. But this is the experience. It runs into U-boats, it runs into surface raiders, it runs into aircraft, and the bulk of the vessels are sunk going there. And so this is loosely based on this, although it's not exactly. PQ-17 sailed from Iceland. This convoy sails from Halifax. So there's a little bit of difference here.
Stand clear of the duck charge racks. Let go, number one.
Action in the North Atlantic, with Humphrey Bogart making every historic moment unforgettable. Raymond Massey, a skipper who would rather shake hands with the devil than give up the ship.
Okay, so that scene there, you just saw Raymond Massey and Bogart's on the tanker when the ship's on fire. It's absolutely just harrowing.
Alan Hale, an ancient mariner who was safer at sea than in port.
So Alan Hale plays a great character. He is the bosun. And can I be clear, this is the image you have of a bosun all the time. Just really a kind of grizzled old seafarer. And in this case, he's running away from his wife to go back out to sea, which, again, is really funny. There's also a scene in here that they have, which I love. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And I'm going to come back to it. It's when they're in the Union Hall. It's just a great image.
I like your voice.
You have to have the love story. It's not a war movie unless there's a love story.
I ought to make you smell knuckles for the duration.
I want to bounce my kid on my knee. I want to be with my wife. Go on, make a law against it.
So this is the scene in the Union Hall. These guys are part of the National Maritime Union, NMU. And one of the things you see is how they go about getting ships. And I love this scene because you don't get to see this too often. So in ports around the United States, there are union halls, and shipping was very unionized. It was just the nature of it. As a matter of fact, one of the things we see post-World War II is a lot of allegations against the unions. And these guys are wearing badges, and underneath them they have a little image of a torpedo indicating that they were on a ship that was sunk. But the badge is their union badge. They had to have a badge. And to be a member of the union would allow you to come into the union hall. You can use it for hanging around with friends, but more importantly, it's where you got your jobs. In this scene, they show them calling out needs for crew. They'll call out for able-bodied seamen and wipers and ordinary seamen and oilers. And so this is how the non-rated, this is the unlicensed crew. This is not the deck officers or the engineering officers. This is how the unlicensed here was getting their job. And these guys were all sitting out and they're having this debate about whether or not to go back to sea, because again, these were civilians. They did not have to go back to sea. They can get a job somewhere else. They can go to a war factory, they can go to a shipyard, or they can get drafted or enlisted into the military. But as a merchant mariner, they were given an exemption. They were allowed to basically not be enlisted and sail as long as they were sailing in the merchant marine. And you can grab ships that were coastwise vessels. You can grab vessels that were going, and a lot of times you didn't know. So for example, when they sign on to the Sea Witch, which is a new Liberty ship, they find out they're putting a whole crew together on this vessel. They don't know where it's going. You're signing up for a voyage from the point when that vessel leaves port until it returns. That could be 2 months. It could be a year. You just don't know. And that's one of the huge ambiguities about sailing in the merchant marine that you just don't get in many other areas.
We can expect attack from any quarter.
Lookouts, be on the alert. Forward and after gun. Fire at will when you sight enemy.
So if you want to learn more about the Merchant Marine in World War II, let me give you a couple of choices here that you can go to and see. So the first one I would go to is this site right here. This is www.usmm.org, usmerchantmarine.org. Great site. It has a lot about the Merchant Marine throughout all its wars, but it has an entire section of the U.S. Merchant Marine in World War II that you can take a look at. It's got some great information, great stories. There's information throughout this section. The second one, and one of the organizations that I am a huge supporter of, is AMMV. This is the American Merchant Marine Veterans organization. This is the entity that worked to get the gold medal awarded to the Merchant Marine veterans. They are working not just for American Merchant Marine veterans of World War II, but they're also working for American Merchant Marine veterans in all wars. And AMMV, a great organization, they have a yearly convention. I've spoken at their yearly convention 2 years ago. I was up in Baltimore at their convention. I got invited to their most recent one in Las Vegas back in March, but I could not attend, unfortunately. Great organization. Really recommend you follow that organization, become a member, donate to them. They do epic work when it comes to them. If you want to learn more about the Merchant Marine in World War II, then head on over to this site under MARAD, the Maritime Administration. The Maritime Administration has the official history of the U.S. Merchant Marine at war. This was put together by the War Shipping Administration. And this document, 81-page document, is all that exists of an official history of the U.S. Merchant Marine in World War II. Understand, the U.S. Navy has a 15-volume series. The U.S. Marine Corps, a 5-volume series. The Army Air Forces, 5 volumes. The U.S. Army has 79 volumes. The U.S. Merchant Marine has 81 pages. That's right, only 81 pages. But it's a great document. It covers the Merchant Marine. It talks about the cargo lift, talks about the wartime fleet, the men who sailed the ships, the administrative machine, and then the present and future of the Merchant Marine. So really recommend, if you want to have a image of the Merchant Marine in World War II this Veterans Day, or excuse me, this Memorial Day, or any day, take a look at this. Think about the 9,500 merchant mariners who lost their lives in World War II. Delivering the arsenal of democracy so that we could defeat the Axis in the largest conflict in all of human history. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come in. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, don't support this page, go on over to AMMV and support that organization. I'll have a link at the end of the notes here for you. You can head right over to AMMV. You can help the veterans of American merchant veterans of wars throughout history. Until our next episode, this is Sal, signing off.